I know that the original agenda didn't, was Mike. Good evening, board members and residents. I'd like to call to order our regular board meeting for Monday, January 27th, 2014. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Brado is asked to be excused. Mr. Capral?
Here.
Mr. Swikowski?
Here.
Mr. Tominello?
Here.
Mr. York?
Here.
Mr. Witt? Here. Mr. Verkast?
Here. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, including approval of the regular board meeting minutes of January 13th, 2014, approval of the bills in the amount of $1,714,628.92, and to concur with the emergency purchase of the replacement furnace at Rosso Hall Buffet Edition in the amount of $6,680 with Arrow Heating and Cooling.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Got a motion by Mr. York. Is there support?
Support.
All right, Mr. Capral. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Next is the approval of the agenda. Board members, there are two proposed revisions. Number one, we'd like to switch items C1 and C3. So what's shown as C1 would become C3 and vice versa. And then also item D2 would be to add a closed session to discuss negotiations with GELC. That's the union for our supervisory. We're currently in contract negotiations with them.
Mr. Supervisor, I'll make a motion to approve the regular agenda with the aforementioned amendments.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Swikowski. Discussion, board members? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next would be announcements. We have a few announcements. I'd like to make the first announcement as on behalf of the board and an unknown number of residents as a public thank you to our water and sewer department. These cold days and nights have resulted in several water main breaks, and our water and sewer department workers have been literally working, I can literally say tirelessly, because they've been out all hours of the day and night, making sure that our utilities are kept up, and for that we are grateful. This is the time of the year when they really put in some extra hours, but really some rough working conditions, so we're thankful for that service. Some events coming up in our library. Mosaic Garden Arts and Crafts will be held Wednesday, February 26th at 7 p.m. Everyone is invited to join in for a visual presentation and discussion of the origins of mosaic, how it is used in the garden, and how you can use it in making crafts for your home. The presentation is free. Refreshments will be provided. Story Hour will be held on Saturday, February 8th from 11 a.m. to noon. The theme this month will be Hearts and Hugs. Tales with Tales will be held Saturday, February 22nd, starting at 11 a.m. Children will get the opportunity to read with Patty, a licensed, certified, and insured therapy dog. Pre-registration is required. To register for these library events, you can call 586-329-1261. Stop in the library, you can sign up. Any of the events in the library for children, those children have to be accompanied by an adult. And for any information on these events, other township events, you can call the supervisor's office at 586-466-1445. And of course, you can always visit our website, harrison-township.org. Are there any other announcements?
We do have one more announcement for a Parks and Recreation event, which is Saturday, February 22nd. It's the family bowling event. Starts at 12:30, goes to roughly about 3 p.m. All all kids are welcome, anywhere from roughly 8 years old to, up to middle schoolers. We'd love to see everybody out there. It costs us $10 per bowler, and that includes 2 games of bowling, pizza, pop, and bowling shoes
All right, great. Good event, and that's at Total Sports?
at Total Sports.
All right, great. All right, if there are no other announcements, we'll move to our next agenda item. That's item B1, approval to temporarily hire Michelle Bark in the accounting department at a rate of $24.17 per hour, not to exceed 80 hours. And this is from the accounting office, which is a department that you oversee, Mr. Witt. Can you
Yep.
speak to that?
Yeah, just in order to help out to close some stuff for year end and prepare for the audit, the accounting department is looking for some additional help and some assistance on doing some things. There's a lot of stuff in the accounting department that's only done once a year, so even though our employee's been in there for an extended period of time, there's some things that she hasn't had the opportunity to do, and she's just looking for some assistance in completing those tasks. We approached Miss Bark. In the past, she's been volunteering some of her time. This just sort of goes beyond, dropping in for an hour. It's a little more extensive than that, so we thought it was appropriate to compensate her for her time.
All right. Any discussion or questions, board members?
Mr. Chairman, I know a while back, we established rates for temporary and part-time people, that if they were at a certain skill level, they were paid so much. Excuse me. And if they possessed a certain higher level, there was a different level of pay, and I know it doesn't reach this.
No. that's
Sure,
fine.
and the reason I'm proposing this rate over the other, and that was a conversation that we had between myself and the accounting department, is Mrs. Bark is uniquely qualified for this. Anybody else off the streets, they might know accounting, they're not gonna know our systems or our software or the way we operate to be able to assist us in the same manner as her. So I thought it was fair to go back to her last hourly rate and go from that.
There's also, I suppose, a factor. Typically, when we hire temporary help, we might say, well, we've got a person who's on disability, or we've got a 1 month temporary assignment, or something like that. Someone who's going to be in on a regular, ongoing 40-hour basis. Per the discussions that we've had, I understand that we would potentially use Mrs. Bark in a format, maybe a couple hours here, a couple hours there. So it's not necessarily the same as hiring and employing someone for an 8-hour period, 5 days a week. This is kind of an on-demand to assist. And it's not something we anticipate to be recurring, but probably more to do with the fact that even though we went through training with an employee in this current seat, and certainly the person who would be receiving the assistance is a highly respected employee and does well in her position. But there's just some of those things through the training process that may not have been dove into as in depth as possible because it's year-end stuff. That's the way I kind of saw it.
Yeah, and I can say that she's volunteered more than this 80 hours previously in helping with some of this transition, some of this training, when there's been questions and that kind of stuff. Phone calls, emails coming in on site, so.
So, a question I had, is she coming in as an employee or a contractor?
It would be a temporary employee.
Is there a benefit to either or?
I don't know that the duration is going to be significant. I think in the past we've treated these like temporary employees. I don't know that we've ever had, established a contractual relationship. This is not something we see to be recurring. This is just one of those things where you say, gee, I forget how to do this, or how should this be handled?
There's some
that sort of
unique
thing.
tasks that just haven't happened with the employee in there yet to, some of that year-end stuff.
Yeah. As a temporary employee, there are taxable, I'm going to struggle to find the right word. There are tax implications if someone retires sitting in a particular chair and then you bring them back for 40 hours in that same chair and same thing. I don't think this mirrors that. This is really, like Mr. Witt said, this is someone who has a unique set of knowledge from having done that job for several years. And we just, this is a department of two. You've got someone handling, a certain set of tasks, someone else handling payables. There's not a lot of crossover there. So I think that's what precipitates this, this proposal. If that answers your question.
Well, I mean, it does, but I guess I'm just, if you bring in a contractor in, and just general discussion, you basically, when they're done, you hand them a 1099, and they're done,
Right.
right? So now you're gonna be putting her on the rolls, there's gonna be administrative stuff that has to take place. You may have to do some, social security matching. I mean, to me, it would be better just to bring her in as a contractor. That's my thought.
Right.
Which is what they might do, I don't know.
Yeah. That,
Glenn
that,
handles that,
right.
So,
Based on
so,
the
so I guess
situation.
just, maybe you can, whatever you do, just report back and
Yeah,
Let
I'll,
us know
I'll
what
let
you do.
everyone know how it works out.
And maybe we can find out the difference and, what's better off for the township as we bring these temporary people in.
Mhm. This is a unique situation compared maybe to say like temporary summer help with someone specifically looking for employment. This is something more where we're asking, so the same thing that we proposed with Mr. Parak upon his
Yeah.
retirement, where he's got a unique skill set.
Yes, I was gonna say, this hourly rate of the 24.17 normally, I think that includes a 25-year longevity pop in that too. It has to, because that's like a $50-some thousand salary at $25 an hour.
Well, we're not gonna pay her $50,000. That was her last
Well,
hourly
no,
rate. That's
no,
what, I mean, that's what we went
understand
to.
that, but if we're talking, do we wanna bring somebody in with their 20-year longevity, or do you wanna bring them in just as with the base rate of that position? We're having a discussion.
Is there further discussion or a motion or?
I'll make the motion to approve temporarily hire Michelle Bark in the accounting department at a rate of $24.17 per hour, not to exceed 80 hours total.
Is there support?
I'll support.
All right.
I think we should make that rate minus the longevity, but that's just my opinion.
Well, if we put into perspective what that longevity is, now I'm strictly going by memory, I want to say that longevity rate is about $4,000 at the top. I'm not certain of that, I'm going by memory. So it's about $2 an hour. So if we were to change this by $2 an hour, we would be saving about $160 if she worked the entire 80-hour.
Is it only
Allotted
4?
period.
I thought it was higher. Well, this is the issue. If in the last negotiations, we didn't include that longevity in there, then I will tell you, we'd be sitting here saying, we'd like to bring ABC person back at $22 an hour.
Sure.
Because that would have been their hourly rate.
That's
Yep.
true. I agree with that.
So, that was my thought process.
Yeah, I follow the logic. I guess what I'm saying is, and I understand, and I don't disagree with the concept. I think what I'm saying though is that the cost that's involved here is,
Minimal.
yeah, it's probably $100.
Yeah, and
one
it-
way or
It's
another.
more of the just, the next time we have somebody that we're gonna bring back, are we gonna say, well, Denny, for example, are we gonna, throw his longevity in there? I don't know, I'm just, somebody can, being in government, we all know this past practice argument, you gave to them, and this is what you did, and,
Sure. Well, the inspectors are something where we have an ongoing relationship, and we have for many years. This is really something unique and temporary. I don't anticipate this to be something that we're gonna address or talk about much in the future,
It's fine.
so. If there's no other discussion at this time, I can open the floor for public comment.
Bill Serville, resident. I was going to mention the inspectors. There's 2 inspectors that come here periodically. One of them, a retired electrical inspector that only fills in occasionally. And of course, the other one fills in because one of our inspectors is off right now. I don't see any difference. They don't get any benefits. It's double dipping. She's already getting benefits. She's a retired person with benefits already. I don't know why you'd pay benefits again. Doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can answer
Yep,
the
we'll
residents.
close the floor for public comment and open it up for board
Yeah.
comment.
we're not paying her benefits. There's no benefits included. This is a part-time job. It would only be the 24/17. Longevity, there is no longevity. It's an
Well, there
hourly rate.
is.
No, there isn't.
I think everybody on this board would agree that the base rate for clerical is right around $44,000. This rate does include a certain amount of dollars for longevity, and you can't argue that point. This $24 rate is the whatever senior account executive rate plus a 20-year longevity that's rolled into the hourly rate. That's what that number represents.
I'm sure we agree on that.
Yeah.
Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello to approve the temporary hire of Mrs. Michelle Bark in the accounting department at a rate of $24.17 per hour, not to exceed 80 hours. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Nay.
I just heard two nays.
And I say that nay just because I don't think that we should be putting longevity in that rate. If it
Understood.
weren't for that, I'd be no problem at all.
Yep, understood. Okay. Unless I misheard, I only heard two nays. I believe the motion carries. Next on the agenda is the item marked C, was marked C3, which we now call C1. This is contracting with Cunningham Limp Company to research the former Lance Cruz Public School Administration Building at a cost not to exceed $9,500, with 50% of the cost reimbursed by Lance Cruz. Board members, we have been researching the option of acquiring the former Lance Cruz Administration Building, or formerly Jefferson Elementary. In discussions and working with Wade Trim, they brought in a firm that they partner with, which is Cunningham Limp. Mr. Newmer had explained that there's a group of three companies that have partnered. They specialize in repurposing older structures. The folks from Cunningham Limp had toured the structure. They gave a preliminary assessment of the building, and they said that the next step should involve certain steps that might be considered due diligence. For example, if we were looking at purchasing this building and using a private company to assist with finance, the bank would require that we do several steps before they would approve a mortgage on the property. So to parallel that similar process, they proposed several things that we might want to have done prior to, making a purchase. They've attached a proposal, and they've estimated or hung a not to exceed price for this work at $9,500. I also had discussions with the Lance Cruz administrators to see what they thought about a cost share. The idea being that if it happened to be that for whatever reason this board chose not to purchase that property, it certainly wouldn't make the property any less valuable, and the school district may wish to enter into an agreement with another party to sell that, and all of these steps, or a majority of these steps, would still have value to that new party. So the idea would be, hey, you own the study unless we buy the building, in which case it's pointless. So we're proposing an agreement and a set of projects to kind of research the viability and safety, whether or not there's any environmental hazards, whether the title is clear, that sort of thing. And that's what we have before us. Is there any discussion? I do have Tom Wilkinson here from Cunningham Limp, and he's available to answer any questions that the board might have about this.
I will just say this, and while obviously we need to find out what's over there if you're gonna move forward with the project. But I know I've come to the conclusion over the last 2 years, this building was brought to us on a deal, I guess, and it was the property in the building for X. And that's the way this all started out. And that sounded like a great deal because we weren't gonna be really out anything, and we get the property in the building. And then as this thing's morphed and they get the you know, the appraisal, and then we want more money, then we want this, then we got all this crazy financing. And then after that, now that I've personally had a chance to step back and look at what's there, you have a building that is very old, I don't know,
87 years, I believe.
okay, 1920s. So we go and move in that building. Let's just say we do that. Then what do we do with these buildings here? You know, these buildings, I guess, they're fine. You know, we renovated the building over there. I just don't, at this point, see why we're gonna move forward to move into an 87-year-old building that I can't imagine that's not gonna cost us upward of $1 million to renovate that building to our needs. And, you know, when you start getting to, you know, that type of dollars, you know, you're almost better off just tearing this building down and building a new building right here. And I know that there's arguments, you know, that this is a residential area and that type of thing, but, you know, this Harrison Township, these buildings have been here for years. You know, the engineering building, that's a relatively new building. This building is, you know, I mean, serves our needs. I don't think that we're gonna be expanding, you know, anytime soon. You know, and I think we just need to decide if we're gonna, if the board, stepping back and looking at our needs and our wants and our pros and cons, on whether or not, we need to ask ourselves, do we even want to move into that building? Let's just say at this point, you know, it's offered at whatever X amount of dollars. I mean, is that what we want to do at this point? I don't know the answer to that question. We haven't had this discussion with the board members in, you know, 2 years. You know, once again, we moved so far away from the original negotiation that we had, which was a good deal, to you know, more money and more this and more that, and you know, I'm not sure at the lofty level it's at right now that we're going to move forward. It might just be cheaper to tear down a building here and build a new building.
I'm not sure either, but that's why we want to do this study, because one of the things that Cunningham Olymp is offering to provide is they'll literally give us an idea. This is what the costs are involved. If you acquire the building, this is what you'll have to do to it to bring it up to suit your needs. And that's an important question that we have. Maybe we need to expand that and ask them, what would it cost to knock down a building that's here and rebuild a new building? I think we're going to find that that's going to be a lot more costly. It's important to understand that this facility is not an 87-year-old facility, but there are parts of it that are 87 years old in terms of its structure. Certainly, the heating and cooling and you know, a lot of the infrastructure of the building is much newer. It was occupied by the school district up till about a year and a half ago. So I think we need to make sure that we put this in the proper perspective. But before I'm comfortable asking this board to consider a purchase of the property, I think we need to know what all the costs are and just what the condition of that building is. And I think this is the prudent next step. And I also believe that the information that we'll get from this study is going to give us the data we can use to make that decision. And so it's a logical decision, it's not an emotional decision. So just as you might make arguments for why you may feel it's a bad one, I think there's some arguments that say it may be a good decision, but I think those should be outweighed by data. You know, what are the costs? Is the building in sound condition? Are there some large maintenance issues involved? There's some other, you know, big questions, and that's what this seeks to uncover.
So, a question, I don't know if you can come up to the podium. So, just so I have an idea, it looks like you're gonna look at structure, you're gonna look at mechanicals. Are you also, my question would be, are you gonna look at asbestos?
Yes,
So, and then also provide costs if we have to abatement
yes.
and whatnot. So we'll be looking at mechanicals,
Electrical,
when they've been
plumbing,
updated.
the window envelope, the roof, every aspect of the building. And I can say that we're doing this type of pre-construction services report probably 2 to 3 times a month. And we've never had a client that's been dissatisfied with the output that Sam Ashley will put together in this. So it's, in my opinion, I think it's very, very well worth the effort,
So you look at foundations as well? Okay.
everything.
Um,
And we'll do a phase one to understand the environmental aspects of it, getting back to the asbestos.
Okay, and you compare that to basic public building requirements as far as, you know, what's required based on code?
Code,
or-
sure.
Right.
Yeah, and really based on not only code, but what your requirements are. So
Okay.
that gets factored in to this. It's about a 30 to 45 day effort, so it's not an overnight type of
And you'll be looking at the outbuilding as well? I know there's an outbuilding in the back. to the-
Yes.
I believe that's to the west?
I believe that's included in it.
Okay.
Ken, if that's been the discussion you've had with Sam, then it's included in that.
And there's like a temporary structure to the north?
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's not, we're not gonna look at that?
No,
Okay.
no, that's, and I apologize, but what we learned is that those buildings, the value of those buildings is practically nil. If you need one, the cost that you can get one for is about the cost of transportation, so typically, you call them a contract, I mean, if somebody wants it, that's fine, but the school doesn't have an interest in the building, and we don't have a value for that temporary structure.
So I know we're in the middle of winter, and I know there's a lot of snow, but you're also gonna look at parking lot conditions,
Mhm.
and
To-
things like that as well?
To the extent that the weather allows us to look at those
Exactly.
conditions.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, wasn't one of those outbuildings used like for maintenance for the vehicles?
There's,
So there have to be an environmental impact study
Yeah.
to see if there's any
yep,
soil contamination or
correct.
underground storage tanks or anything. Or
There's two parts to the course of action that Cunningham Limp proposes. One is, we've already asked for and received a bunch of information from the school district relative to work they've already done. Obviously, the district is not looking to, we've got a long-term relationship with the district. I don't think the district is looking to unload something or to not disclose something. So one part of that is here's all the information about the history of the building and work that's been done. The second part is the phase one environmental site assessment. And the idea there is that a bank, for example, might say, do a phase one ESA. If you discover something, then you might have to go to phase two. So we don't anticipate something that we're gonna find, but phase one, if it uncovers something that's significant, say, hey, there is some site of contamination or a concern with some material, then maybe phase two would be required, and that would be some additional cost to research it. But a clean phase one ESA is what we're looking for, and probably what we're expecting.
I think, well, if we decide to move forward with this part of it, I think it makes sense if we internally look at our buildings as they stand now and see what we have in terms of deferred maintenance cost over the same time period, projects that we would have to undertake. I mean, we've sort of patched and held the parking lot together, but at some point that's going to be something that needs to be done. You know, there's some ongoing things. So I think for us to be able to have a comparison, you know, because you might say this costs $20, but we're going to have to spend $20 here, so it really is the same cost. It doesn't matter where you're doing it, it's just location. So I think it makes sense maybe internally we do that, or how we do that, but it should happen at the same time, I think.
Yeah, there's a need to look at, clearly, one phase of this is to look at what would be involved in acquiring this building and making any potential improvements or renovations. But a second thing we have to look at eventually is what'll it cost not to acquire the building? Meaning, if we choose to not to acquire this facility and we choose to stay here, that isn't a $0 figure either. Obviously, a completely renovated building has a certain life. So if we say, all right, well, we're looking at this being relatively cost-free for the next 15 years, we'd have to then at least look at what would the cost be to stay here for 15 years. And there's a lot of different factors. I don't think we're at the phase where we want to discuss those things now. We're merely saying, if we want to proceed with this, we've got to do some homework. And if we're going to choose a firm to do that homework, I'm more comfortable choosing a firm that already has a working relationship with our engineering services provider, who we have a good working relationship with. So it's sort of like getting a recommendation on a contractor from a friend who's already had that, has already worked with them. I think that's really what we're here to decide right now.
Yeah, I think when you do a study like this, it eliminates speculation. You know, so we walk in there and we all have an idea of what could happen, but what's it really gonna cost? So this is basically what, that's what it's gonna tell us. And I'm not completely sold that we need that building based on cost. So this is gonna help me with that, but one thing I do wanna mention is that area where that building is, that corner there, has been identified as one of our downtown,
Village
nodes.
nodes.
It's a village node, so, you know, the whole thing is, if we ever want to establish a downtown, which is part of our current master plan, you know, this would be a good start, but again, that's a long ways down the road.
Correct, right.
But I just wanna bring that up, so, you know, if you say, why not stay here, and it may be very feasible, but the other thing we need to do is, you know, we need to look, need to start establishing that, if that's the way we want to move the township, in the direction we want to move the township.
Right, and those are the kind of factors that have maybe a powerful emotional appeal to one board member or resident, and maybe not so much to another. But at least to the extent that we can, I think we need to get as much information as we can that's subjective, or, you know, non-subjective, I guess is what I'm saying. Is enough data, enough facts, so that we're as informed as possible prior to making this decision. And again, just within the deliverables, refine the scope of work for anticipated improvements. So we're literally looking at kind of tightening up. What would it cost? What are the steps that would be necessary to bring the building up to the level that we need to?
I think $4,700 is a bargain, you know, because you could go millions in debt. I think that's a heck of a bargain.
Right.
One question on the, I assume the school board is on board with the other half?
Yeah, actually, I'll say, I haven't communicated with the school board, I've communicated with the administration. And I believe that they have a certain amount of freedom to, you know, to extend up to a certain part. But no, the short answer to your question is that the administration agreed to this. I provided them that agreement, so.
All right.
Is there a discussion or a motion? Is there a motion this evening?
I'll make a motion to contract with Cunningham Limb to research the former L'Anse Creuse Public School Administration Building prior to purchase, including reviewing all existing environmental data, perform a Phase 1 ESA, prepare survey and title documents, create an existing as-built set of plans, propose improvements and costs, and develop a schedule for the next steps if warranted at a cost not to exceed $9,500 total, with 50% of the cost to be reimbursed by L'Anse Creuse Public Schools.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt, supported by Mr. Tominello. There has been a fair amount of discussion. If it's all right with the board, I'll open the floor for public comment.
Bill Serville, taxpayer. I think what the issue here is want versus need. An analogy would be that you have a perfectly serviceable used car, but of course used cars require maintenance, just like our campus here does. And you're looking at what you consider to be maybe an upgrade to another used car. Has anybody ever seen the commercial, "Show me the Carfax"? I don't know why we're paying for this at all. While I'm sure this firm is quite competent to do this, it sounds like they do it all the time, I think L'Anse Creuse School System should pay for this in its entirety. Furthermore, you haven't identified a need. On the last election, you went out for $500,000 for the fire department. That came out to around, if I remember correctly, around $440,000. The numbers I'm hearing thrown around here, this project could cost us well over $1 million. You've never gone to the public and even asked them if they want to do this. That's a lot of money to be spending, and I realize you're not committing to it yet, but you're taking the next step. I really think you should talk to the L'Anse Creuse School and say you'll proceed with the negotiations after they do this study. We shouldn't be doing it at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, move back to board comment. We did have some discussion on whether or not we should take this study on, or the school district, or who it might be. And I do believe that one way or another, let's just say we've got a not to exceed figure of $9,500. And let's say they do it for $8,000, and we're pleased to say that it was done for less than we thought. when it's done, it doesn't matter whether you pay for it in your school taxes or whatever form of taxes, $8,000 will be spent in tax dollars to hire a private firm to take a look at this. So ultimately, I think sharing the cost is a fair split. But more importantly, I like the idea that the firm will be working for me because I'm the one who is kind of in the option chair. I don't have to acquire this building. And I want to make sure that the work that's done is in the interest, in my best interest. So I'm more comfortable having this study done by the township. With regard to a want versus a need, I understand that argument, and I think there's something to be said for that. But at this point, we can't even necessarily make that decision until we know how many miles are left on our used car, or whether that engine needs to be rebuilt, and how much the next car is going to cost us. And I think that's really the phase that we're at right now. We're just getting that data, or that Carfax, as it was said. I think that's a responsible next step. Is there any other discussion?
I guess there's one more item you could address, and the resident also made the point that the dollar value could be in the millions of dollars. I haven't heard any dollar values, and I don't know if you can speak to that.
No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why I was,
Right, right. I think that's the number we want to hear. I'm not aware of what that number would be. Certainly, I can tell you this much. If we said we want to acquire that building, I guess in theory it could cost us thousands of dollars to move things in. If we said we'd like to line the walls with granite, then it could cost us millions. So I think at this point it's premature for us to hang a number on there. I guess it's from zero to a whole lot of money. But truly, there's probably some things that we need to do. Maybe for example, the boiler needs to be replaced or recertified. That could be a significant expense. We need to know that. On the other hand, they might say, wow, this thing was just refurbished and it's in great shape and it's good for 20 years. Just in the time that I've been supervisor over a 3-year period, I think I've probably had to purchase easily a half a dozen furnaces or air conditioners or both on any number of buildings. Maybe that building is in great shape and it won't need that for a while. I know already just this year we've done 2 of them here on this campus. So, that's what we really need to get an idea or a feel of. But that number, that's an elusive number. So if anyone's going to hang a figure on it, I'd like to think that it's a firm that does this regularly, does these studies multiple times in the course of a month, should have a pretty good handle. I can't imagine that there's something unique about that building relative to other buildings that were built during the general time frame. In other words, I don't think that's different than other, 1920s, 1930s, public structures.
My point was just that, as part of the board, I haven't heard any numbers. I think that's why we're doing the study, and I just don't want that number to be perceived as a number that we've heard and we've talked about.
I understood, and that's a valid point. At this point, yeah, I don't believe there is a number.
Mr. Chairman, I guess, the one thing we have to find out is whether or not that building is even user-friendly.
Right.
I mean, it was set up as an administration building for the schools. We're looking at it. If for some reason it does come to pass that we have various departments that are serviced by the public, that they have to be accessible. So that's what I'm looking at, that it says that they will provide the improvements what would be needed and what it would cost us.
Correct.
So at least, I don't think we'd be going into this blind at all.
Right. The biggest difference between their use and our use of the building is that
Sure.
we regularly contact the public. I mean, we in the course of a day, depending on what's going on, whether it's tax collections or what season of the year it is, we frequently get visitors. If we were to acquire this building, could we make a drive-through lane? Would there be an advantage to having a single counter where people could get all their business done instead of walking to the building department, getting something, walking over to the other building, into the treasurer's office, paying something, coming back with a receipt to the building department to finish their business? Maybe it's simply walking across the aisleway. Those are all things we're going to have to consider.
Well, it's like was mentioned before, we got two specific sites, neither one pay taxes to the community.
Right. That's another
So-
advantage. Right. If we were to put all the work into one and turn the other one into private land, well, then it would go back on the tax rolls. That's something also that'll be considered. If there's no other discussion, we've got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Tominello to contract with Cunningham Limp to research the former Lance Cruise Administration Building at a cost not to exceed $9,500, with 50% of the costs to be reimbursed by the Lance Cruise Public School District. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries.
Can I
Thank you,
just
Mike.
ask the gentleman one question?
Sure, absolutely.
You don't have to get up at the podium. The big question over there is, do we have to have an elevator or not?
Right.
You don't have to answer that now, but that is like the burning question
Michigan Handicap.
that keeps coming up.
User friendly, also you need to be handicap approved.
Yep.
right?
Accessible.
Right.
Accessibility is gonna be something that is looked at per code.
Okay.
I'll also say that every time we put one of these reports together, I would say only half the time does it lead to any kind of construction. What it leads to is an educated knowledge of the potential project, and that's what you're getting out of.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. I realize that when we switched this around, we were trying to respect.
Yeah, and then we
yeah.
got, and then I was
And
just
basically,
thinking
so I don't know if there's any objection, but if you
Let's
guys
move
don't
that.
mind,
He's got less hair than me.
I'll make a motion to move C3 to C2 and C2 to C3.
yeah. If there, is there any objection to
No,
changing the
no.
agenda?
Not at all.
Without any objection, then, we're gonna address next the item that was originally C1, moved to C3, and now we'll call it C2.
Okay.
And that is adopting a resolution concerning parking spaces at 35409 Jefferson. Board members, during Phase 2 of the bike path, the bike path grant was split into 3 phases. Phase 2 of the bike path was constructed in 2012, and at least a section of it ran along Jefferson near Shook Road. We submitted plans to the Macomb County Department of Roads, and after a review of those plans, they approved them. In order to construct the path in several areas, we needed to acquire some right-of-way property, and that required negotiations with each property owner, and in most cases, some form of compensation. However, during the construction, the Macomb County Department of Roads made changes in the field which eliminated 3 parking spots along Jefferson. Those parking spots were named in the right-of-way acquisition paperwork and in the consent to grade. And because of that, the property owner has approached us with a proposal for a remedy. Basically, what occurred was the right-of-way, in many cases, is used as parking, but in this case, the area from the edge of the road to the sidewalk in front of the building was kind of a sea of asphalt. But it allowed for 3 parking spots nose first. Macomb County Department of Roads didn't like the idea that those spots typically resulted in people backing out onto Jefferson. So we went through a process of working with the engineer and the road commission at the time to try to find out how we could replace and change those parking spots. We came up with a solution that we thought was agreeable to all parties, but somehow during the review phase, Macomb County Department of Roads failed to realize that there was a problem with those 3 spots. They did approve the plans, but once they saw them in the field, they said, hey, we've got a problem here, and made it clear that they couldn't go ahead with those 3 parallel parking spots. They have worked with the property owner to try to find other alternatives, but one of the main concerns that the property owner has is that the building that they own generally fills up the parcel of land to where there is no additional parking. But throughout the history of the use of that building, the adjacent right-of-way has been used for parking. And at this point, we've heard no objection from the Department of Roads to allow that to continue. The concern the property owner has is if in the future, if a proposal is brought to our planning commission and the planning commission reviews the proposal and says, well, this requires 14 parking spots, but you really don't have any full parking spots as a part of your site, they're saying they want to make sure that they're allowed to continue to recognize the use of those on the public property. Now, as it pertains to the right to have access to that public property, since we don't own the right-of-way, we have no leverage or say to say that this property owner can have access. What we're being asked to agree to is in the event that they do have permission from the owner of that property to use it for parking, they would like to make sure that we continue to agree to recognize that. And I think it's important for this board to understand that whatever the arrangement is, if the owner of 35409 has permission to use that as parking spots, and we were to choose to arbitrarily say, no, we're going to ignore that and not consider it, we would likely end up in litigation and lose, because we don't have that right to say what arrangement they can make with another party. So to pare this down, this resolution that's presented before us basically asks us to agree that in the future, if they have a right to that property, we'll consider those spots for purposes of planning and review. And you can also see that Mr. Huth has reviewed this. I've spoken with Mr. Hoffner. I found no reason not to agree to this. It is important to note that the proposed motion is to adopt the attached resolution subject to the property owner's release of future claims. In other words, part of the reason why we're addressing this now is because the property owner is saying, in other words, why didn't we talk about this before? Well, the property owner is saying to us, hey, wait a minute, you showed us a set of plans that showed 3 parallel parking spots, and I signed a document agreeing to an exchange in exchange for those parking spots, but when we find where we are today, those parking spots aren't there. I would like this as a potential remedy. So obviously, we're agreeing to this remedy, satisfying their claim that they were somehow treated improperly during that negotiation phase.
Well, they're treated improperly by the county.
The problem is
You know,
yeah,
I remember
understand.
when all this was going on, and I saw those plans, and we were sitting here, and the county was saying, "Oh, we're going to allow these parking spots." I think I was the one saying they're not going to allow that. I think Larry might have said that too, and Tony just kept on moving forward with it because the county kept, saying yay, yay, yay. So I know if we were to get sued, I know I'd go in there and say, we got plenty of video that says, blame the county. Don't look at me.
Yeah. Right,
We were just, following what the county said.
right. I may recall the series of events maybe in a slightly different manner, but regardless of how we got here, what
And
we've
you were
got
on the
now.
committee. I'm on the outside.
Sure, that's all right. Regardless of what it is, where we are now is we've got a request from the property owner and her representation to execute this resolution. And the resolution basically says that we're going to acknowledge those parking spots in the future. I'd asked Mr. Huth, do we need somewhere in this resolution to acknowledge that they have to have access to them? And he said it isn't necessary to be in this resolution because that's a given. If you say, well, you have to recognize their use. Well, sure, we recognize their use, and the county says you can't park there. That's a relationship between them and the county, and not one that has to be our responsibility at this phase.
What does that say in here about the county?
Where does that say? I don't know what the question is that you're asking.
Yeah, being in court, we just had a decision come down, so you have to read all of this plain language, right? We can't read into it at all. Where does it say that the county, that it's in the county right away, and that if in fact the county says they can't park there, that's not our responsibility, because that's not what it says. What it says.
I'm going to answer that question. It doesn't say that. I just said
Well-
that. First of all, it identifies it as the old Shook Road right-of-way, number one. And number two, it says nothing about their requirement to get permission from the county, because that's a given. We can't somehow imply in this document that they have permission. So Mr. Huth told me that didn't need to be included in the
While I
resolution.
understand that, I thought it would be a given on that other item too, because the item was so stupid, nobody's gonna say that, the same deal as this. But the simple fact is, the court said, no matter how ridiculous that item is, it says A, B, C, D. That's my point. If you read this plain language, it says specifically, the parking area, blah, 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 shall be counted towards any required parking spaces in any future proceedings before Harrison Township Planning, blah, blah, blah. The resolution will run with the land. You know, in that statement, it sounds, and you could interpret it, that we're giving them the rights to that right of way like we own it. And I understand that we don't own it, and we all understand in this room that we don't own it. But I think you need to put some type of language in here that the county actually owns that right of way. We're just saying, you know, I agree that, you know, let's let them, you know, count that and all that.
Right.
My only thing is that I think we should have some type of language in here that indicates that right now the county is the one that controls that right of way. We really have nothing to do with that right of way. If, for example, if the county comes back and says you can't use those parking spots. Let's just say that happens, right? Then what happens? Mr. Gannon-Alec is gonna be up at the podium saying, Harrison Township, I got my document, I'm gonna sue you. Because that's what happens.
I fully understand
And then what
that
happens
argument.
is, you're gonna sit here and say, well, Mr. York, we have this document, and I'm gonna say, well, Ken, I was at a meeting 2 years ago, and we all agreed on this, but the reality was, it's plain language, and we have to read the plain language, and I think it just could be a little tighter. So-
I fully
so-
understand that argument because I said, although certainly not verbatim, I said exactly what you just said to Mr. Huth. My two concerns were, do we need a release of future claims, number one, and number two, do we need in here to acknowledge that they have to also have permission?
Right.
Mr. Huth said no and yes. No, you do not need to name that in there. He said that is not a requirement because it's not an authority that we can grant. But yes, you do need to acknowledge future claims. I said, do we need to modify the resolution? He said, no, you should put it in the board motion. Those are the two things, but exactly what you just said to me is exactly what I said.
I mean,
to
that's
Drew.
the way I read it, so
understand.
I
you know.
think there's a couple of things there. I think there's item 2 in this letter, consent to grade to the town of Charter Township of Harrison.
Right. This was, and I'll just say, this was the
This was
agreement.
before,
Yeah, this consent to grade, this was the agreement that we executed with the property owner in order to get the permission to disrupt their area and acquire a portion of right-of-way.
Look, I have no problem with the thing, I just
And
don't
then
want
al-
somebody to come
and
back.
the second part of that was, I think Mr. Hu sent a letter to the Macomb County Department of Roads,
Right.
and I don't know if there was any comment back from the Department of Roads.
And there was none. What the Department of Roads acknowledged is that there's two factors involved here. One is their relationship or agreement with the property owner, and the other is our agreement. As it pertains to our willingness to acknowledge those in the event that they have permission, that falls on us. We have that right to say, yes, the planning commission will acknowledge any adjacent property for purposes of meeting your parking requirements. We have that authority. And the Department of Roads has no objection to us agreeing to that. And as I said, if we didn't agree to it, we would probably end up being sued anyways. But the second part of it is, as it pertains to the property owner establishing that relationship with the Department of Roads, it's a separate entity and it's not one that we enter into. And I believe, at least in part, that was why Mr. Huth, his proposal was, we don't want to name them as some other party. As it pertains to our willingness to acknowledge, let's just say, for example, that I owned a business and you owned a vacant lot next door. And I didn't own said vacant lot, but you agreed that you would allow me to use that vacant lot. And I went to planning commission, I said, hey, I got a vacant lot there, and there's enough parking to satisfy all my requirements, and I have a legal relationship with Mr. Caprell. If the planning commission said, no, we refuse to do it, I'd say, well, you're treating me unfairly. I've already secured your requirements. Now, they might say you need a 10-year lease, or you need a document that says, if you break this relationship, then everything goes away. But that's for a future planning commission to decide in the event that the property owner brings something to planning
So
commission.
these are requirements we would use, you know, in looking at different ordinances, you know, establishing, you know, numbers as far as, requirements for volume and things like that.
Yeah, required number of parking spaces. If it were a party store compared to a, gosh, I don't know, an arcade or whatever the use of that building is, it determines how many parking spots you
So
need.
people park there anyway, right? Same type of thing Ken was talking about. But the whole thing, this basically allows us to use that in our formulas, looking at those requirements as far as spots and numbers and things like that.
So what would happen, Larry, if the county took back that right away? What in fact would happen? I'm just running it out. Let's just say that the county comes in, for argument's sake, and says, you're not allowed to park there anymore.
And then that would be something, if that was established before a plan or a change, or a site plan review was brought in, that would have to be taken into consideration.
But that's a relationship between the property owner and the
That's
county.
correct.
That's
We
not
don't-
one that we
don't go to
want
the
to,
Department of Roads,
right.
it's the applicant goes to the Department of Roads.
I can just hear the, well, I got a document here, but, all right.
Well, as I said, I can only say it so many times.
No,
I
we-
said
I
the exact
agree.
same thing to
I
Mr. Hood.
agree.
I said, shouldn't it say in here that one of the triggers is they have to have permission to use the property? And he said, that's their responsibility. All we're acknowledging is that if they have sites and they have control of said sites, we'll acknowledge them when we review plans. And as I said, if we refuse to sign this and try to employ that strategy, we just end up getting sued. We pay Mr. Kirk and his friends a bunch of money for them to say, you guys are wrong, let them use those sites anyways.
You know, this is the right thing to do. I mean, this
Right.
whole thing just was not handled properly, and this is the least we can do. You know, it's a nice corner. The applicant keeps that up, you know, I mean, this is the least we can do. People use that anyway, so we need to give her the tools that she can use to continue to improve that property.
Correct. Right.
I agree. I just don't want anybody to misinterpret it at a later date, you know. I mean, we're not gonna be here maybe 20 or 30 years from now.
But this document will, so that's all we have to.
Well, that's my
You know, We
point.
just need to make sure it's tied to that property, and I don't know how we do that.
I
In
think
our
it's,
files,
I think it's supposed to be recorded with the
It will be
property.
recorded, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it says it runs with the
marked to be
land.
recorded.
Okay,
Yes.
that's a good thing.
It'll be
And that was
recorded.
So
the
when
whole
we're
point of it.
all gone,
Right.
okay, great.
Then the argument changes. That part that, you know, the county owns it and all that. it's just-
We all know the county owns the right of way.
I understand.
Yep.
I just don't want any trouble for a later board.
You know, I'll
That's
go
why
ahead,
we're doing this.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to adopt the attached resolution, subject to the property owner's release of future claims.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Capral. Now, just a point of clarification, we don't need to read that entire resolution into the record in order for it to be a resolution.
No.
And, and do you believe it would require a roll call vote?
I don't,
Yes.
Yeah.
one more thing, Mr. Chairman, as
Yep.
part of that release, I don't think there was, Mr. Gentinelli have any problem. Just an acknowledgement in that document that we don't own it, we're not guaranteeing any rights or any usage of that, if that's
Right.
acceptable.
And that's why it's in there that says we can apply for a variance. And that was the whole idea, so that we have a mechanism in place to
Okay,
try to
I-
fix
I
the
can
problem.
surely add that verbiage to the motion.
And could you say that again?
I'll let Mr.
Yeah, part of it was the release, the rest of it,
Right.
just say that it includes an acknowledgement by the property owner that we don't own that property and we're not guaranteeing access to that property.
That was that other caveat that you spoke to Mr. Hooper.
Yep, an acknowledgement by the property owner that we neither own the land nor guarantee access.
Correct.
To said land. I like that. Sounds kind of legal.
And that's in your motion.
Yep. So if I might repeat the motion to adopt the attached resolution, subject to the property owner's release of future claims and an acknowledgement by the property owner that we neither own the land nor guarantee access to said land. I guess I'd say land, I might say right of way. To further define that land. All right?
Continue support.
All right, good. We've discussed it at a fair length. I see there's some public comment. If it's all right with the board, we'll open the floor for public comment.
Bill Serville, resident. Well, I certainly concur this property owner does need relief. But Mr. Darren had a point. On the second page of this, there's a second third paragraph, it says that with the construction of the bike path, there was a reduction of the number of parking spaces available for this commercial property. If you were to add on there, due to changes made by the county, that would somewhat protect the township. All right, my question is though, if I understood what was said up here, the original plan was for them to park on Jefferson as well as these parking spaces. Do these parking spaces alone meet their parking requirements, or do they still need the ones on Jefferson? Because you could do the same thing you're doing here on Jefferson, if it's right of way. No? Okay, and in addition to that, I have one other thing. I know of at least one property on North River Road, a restaurant, that does have a permanent agreement to park cars in the road right of way. I don't want to name names, but you could actually recommend as a board to the county road or the Department of Roads that they grant some similar thing to these people, so to show that you're on board. So, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. One of the things was parking requirements. That's a big variable at this point because currently that building is not occupied. So if someone occupies that space, as I alluded to earlier, the number of parking spaces that are required is really dependent on the use of the building. There are some that have maybe a lot of traffic, others that might have very, I'm not thinking of any, but there might be one use that requires 2 spots per person or per seat, and one that might require much less. But at this point, it's kind of conjecture for us to kind of guess. It's speculative to say how many are required. Second, if I could. Second point, there was a point made about due to the county's change in plans, it's important to recognize that as it pertains to this bike path project, the county is the entity that's doing this bike path. Now, we contributed 20% of the funding, and obviously we secured the grant, but the federal government, the state, nobody acknowledges the township in this. So this is a county project. That bike path is a county project. We assume maintenance, but as it pertains to who's responsible, clearly the county is responsible. But this decision, this action is independent of that. This statement, as I see it, this third paragraph, acknowledges that with the construction of the bike path, there was a reduction of the number of parking spaces available. That's factual. Whether it's because of the bike path or because a curb was put in or whatever, there used to be head-first parking spots off of Jefferson into that area. And now some of those are no longer accessible. It's worth noting the township, in spending these grant dollars with the county, did make other improvements to that area in the form of stamped concrete, not only for beautification, but the potential enhancement for outdoor sales and use of that area. So we did play a role in this, and the property owner was compensated per the consent to grade. And then finally, as it pertains to a relationship between business owners and the county and the use of the right-of-way, I would say on a fairly regular basis, we intercede in conjunction with property owners to keep a good working relationship with the Department of Roads. Having said that, I've not found a circumstance where the Department of Roads has been unreasonable with a property owner in resolving parking issues or working with the use of right-of-way to accommodate a business. So I don't know if that addresses some of the comments of the public. If there's
I
other
just
comments.
wanted to ask a question, and I don't know, maybe someone can answer. Is this a situation, is this the right of way here?
That's a property line, yep.
That's the property line, so so those, what are labeled 1, 2, and 3, that sort of just cuts through there, right?
Yep.
That's what we're talking about, that's the
Right.
right of way there?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
That was in the right of way.
Okay.
Right. So the rear end
I'm
of a
not an
vehicle could be
engineer, so I
hanging
see
in there.
like 3 lines, so I don't know if this one is.
No, yep. That dotted line is the property line between
Okay.
the right of way and 354.
So they're just really short, on that backing up, what about, I don't know what that might represent, 10
a couple of feet. Oh no, 5 feet.
Yeah.
But in addition,
Plus you have to have the backing out too, so.
correct.
yeah, no,
But in
that's
addition
fine.
to that, if the county and the property owner were to negotiate a means by which they could use the parking spots
Right.
that are across Old Shook, That's between them.
Mhm.
We're not
No,
saying
oh, no, I
that we're gonna enter into those negotiations, but if they have permission to use those spots and they need 10 more spots, that's okay with us.
Well, no, you learn something new every day. You drive by a place all the time, you assume, I mean, anybody that's driving by there would assume that those are spots, they're attached to the building.
Actually, I assumed that when I bought it 45 years ago.
You know, until I looked at this tonight,
That's the thing.
right? Until I looked at that, I didn't know that,
Everything was good till the improvement was made.
That's right. That's right.
you know?
All right, is there further discussion? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Tominello, with support by Mr. Caprell, to adopt the attached resolution, subject to the property owner's release of future claims and an acknowledgement by the property owner that we neither own the right-of-way nor guarantee access to said right-of-way. Mr. Witt, will you please take a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. Capel?
Yes.
Mr. Brado is excused. Mr. Swikowski?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkust?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you.
I just want to have one procedural question for you.
Sure, you can come out to the podium if you don't mind.
Because obviously, we all wanted to get it recorded, so when I drafted and gave it to Rob for him to, when you guys get it in final form, are you gonna record it, or you want me to record it? I just wanna make sure it gets recorded and that we get a recorded copy.
Sure. Two
And if
thoughts
you don't
here.
have the answer tonight, you know,
Yeah,
you can call.
Yeah, that's gonna be a question best answered by Mr. Huth, because he's been, I don't mean to ignore Mr. Kirk, but,
Right.
but because he's been involved with that. But my thought is if I were in your shoes, I'd wanna record it myself, and that way I know
Right.
it was done.
And then I'll give you guys a recorded copy, I just wanna make,
Yep, but I think Mr. Huth would, and unfortunately, Mr. Huth had an event with his
Yeah, I know.
family, and he wasn't able to be here, but I'm sure he would be the best person to answer that,
okay,
so, all right?
thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
your
you.
help.
Thank you very much. All right, next on our agenda is C3, formerly known as C2. And this addresses appointing board members to the Coastal Zone Management Waterfront Development Committee. So that's a mouthful. Board members, as you recall, last fall, we were awarded a grant of $17,000 to be matched with an additional amount from township funds to study the coastal redevelopment in the township. Wade Trim was the firm that we selected to perform that study, and one stipulation of that study, or that grant, was that the study or no work could begin until 2014. The folks at Wade Trim contacted me, said, when do we get started? We'd like to call a meeting, and it was that time that I realized that this is the sort of project that should really be overseen by a subcommittee of board members. So I proposed with this agenda item that we establish a subcommittee to manage this. Now, I think first of all, it's important to note that this study is going to be performed almost exclusively by Wade Trim. And I don't believe this is the kind of study that we're telling them what to do, because by its very nature, we're asking them to develop a plan for us. So there's a need for some interface, but probably not an extensive amount of steering or decision-making by this subcommittee. Having said that, I do think it's responsible that it's overseen by a group of people and not by any one board member or any haphazard combination. Since this item went out, I was contacted by 3 board members to serve on this. I would like to serve on this committee. I was contacted by Mr. Brado, Mr. Tominello, and Mr. Witt. So all 3 of those individuals expressed an interest, and all 3 have unique talents or abilities to assist with this. I can say this is something that prior to this grant, something that I've been working on and talking to folks at various levels of state and county government for well, at least 2 years anyways. So I would like to continue to work on this committee. But how we might go about the business of choosing 3 out of a pool of potentially 4 candidates, I guess at this point I'd have to leave up to the board to address.
I think Mr. Capel brought a hat.
Yeah, and truly, if all 4 still feel strong about serving on here, and no one steps out, I can't think of another way that we could possibly choose this committee other than a random process. But
I mean, I don't think Dave served on any committees or.
No, he has not.
Or
and he-
Larry, I don't know that Larry served on any committees either.
Question is, do you have to limit it to 3? I
Well-
mean, are you gonna be doing that much voting on it, or?
Well, no,
know.
the issue being that it becomes, any time we meet, if it's greater than 3, then it's a public meeting, because we'd have a
Okay, you're
quorum.
right,
So that's the
yeah.
concern.
Becomes,
It-
yeah.
Yeah, and that certainly doesn't mean
I
that
agree.
somehow we're trying to be secretive, but it avoids an impromptu
Yeah,
meeting
you're
where he
right.
says, hey, or a phone call, or an email exchange, it's subject to open meeting.
Yeah, people just, they think that you're doing something improper.
Right, yeah, this,
As an alternate.
yeah, the scope of this project, as I say, I don't think that we're gonna be regularly meeting on a weekly basis or providing a great level of input. But, you know, there's a need you know, I'm sure there's gonna be a need for us to play some steering role. So,
I'm not playing favorites here, nor do I really want to get involved in the discussion, but, you know, I will say Mr. Tominello being on the planning commission, you know, that's sort of like a liaison between, since he was all in with the master plan and all of that.
Village nodes and
I mean,
whatnot,
I'll
yep.
be honest, I think that, that'd probably be very helpful in that committee.
I agree
I'm
with
just
that.
throwing my 2 cents.
No,
I'm not picking one person over the other.
Yep, I definitely agree that Mr. Tominello would play a big role on that, or could certainly bring, with the years that he's spent in planning and his current role as planning commission liaison, would seem that he would have some valuable input on that.
Plus, he'll know what planning commission will allow and what they won't allow.
So,
I'm gonna stay out of this discussion.
well, so I,
So we grab the hat, or?
yeah, so that's what I'm saying, so I don't know if the board,
I mean, Dave's not here to defend himself,
Right.
either way, so
Yeah,
Right.
there's not a there's not a right or a wrong answer. Eh?
no.
Is it something we
And I'm
have to
content to-
decide tonight?
Well,
Would you want Mr.
the
Rogers?
problem is Wade Trim is saying, we wanna get started, we've got a timeline, and to date, we're not able to establish that meeting.
Can you appoint an alternate?
Yeah, we can certainly appoint an alternate. I mean, we can have a committee of 4 with no greater than 3 meeting, So for example, if there's a need, and that's part of what's a little tricky, is because a lot of times, some of it's a full-time function, Sometimes they Dave Newmer might happen to be in the office and say, hey, can you take a look at this? So I don't have a problem saying that we have a 3-member committee with 1 alternate.
That
The
may-
acknowledgement
that
is
would be
that we can't all meet at one time.
Right.
Right.
Maybe a good compromise.
And there
So-
might be times where, people, being a trustee, and I'm not saying this, saying anything bad, but, maybe you have a mid-afternoon meeting and the trustee can't get out of work or whatever. Trustees do have other jobs,
Right.
Yeah, and I think something that should be stressed on this entire thing is there's going to be huge opportunities for people to have input on this grant and what comes out at the end throughout the process. This 3-member committee isn't the end-all be-all that's going to shape what this is. The part of this study is to go out and get public input. Probably talk to the planning commission if that's what we tell them to do. Work with those parties to be able to come up with the end. We're just sort of the
Probably presentations
liaison.
along the way.
Yeah.
and-
Right.
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't say that this is going to happen, but as an example, the firm that's doing this might say, well, we come up with a preliminary study, and we're gonna go out on a nice sunny afternoon at Mariners Point and talk to passersby and propose it to them and accept their input. When I proposed in here, well, maybe this committee needs to be a combination of public, trustees, board members, as well as members of the public, that was the answer that I got, that as it pertains, we don't want to limit that public input to only members of that committee.
Sure.
That public input is anticipated to be
Yeah,
broad-based.
probably similar to the way we did, we implemented our master plan. That was a series of meetings with different interest groups throughout the township, both business, residential, different areas, waterfront, non-waterfront, so, everything was proposed and we got a lot of feedback. I would imagine the same type of thing
Correct,
is gonna happen with this as well.
exactly. So, I'm
gonna sit back and just vote yes for whatever the
Yeah.
motion is. So.
Yeah, so the issue is, I mean, as chair, I guess I'm in an awkward spot because I do feel a strong desire to continue to be involved in something that I've brought to the table. in working with multiple groups.
Can you give us the 4 names again?
Would be myself, Adam, Larry, and David, not in any particular order. And I can see an argument for Larry as a member of that committee.
And I was gonna suggest that Mr. Verkest, Mr. Brado, Mr. Tominello, and Mr. Witt is an alternate in the event that he's in the office and you need a meeting right away, you have an alternate that's available to go.
I don't know.
The only concern that I would have with an alternate, and maybe Mr. Kirk can answer, is if we send out an email to 4 board members because we have an alternate, are we putting ourselves in a situation where we might be crossing the line? As far as like you know what I mean? If we say, hey, what do you think about this? And we send it to 4 people.
I think it would be okay if you just send out like a notice of a meeting to 4, but I wouldn't want to get any discussions on the items with 4.
Right,
Let
and
me
that's what
ask
I
you
would
this,
look at as
in-
like zoning board. We have alternate members for the zoning board, but you
Right.
distribute packets, but through the course of correspondence, the
We just have to
zoning
be
board.
careful of what our correspondence
Correct.
is.
Right. By having an alternate, so that's your
Yeah.
point.
But even then, you getting off on a tangent here, but you know, when you're dealing with these committees, right? The trigger for an open meetings violation is a decisions made, right?
Right.
I would argue in these cases where there's these committees like this, especially for this coastal redevelopment study, that's eventually going to come to this board really for the approval,
Right.
that anybody on that committee is really not making any decision, because ultimately
Right.
the whole thing, nothing is really in concrete until it comes to this board that evening and we go, yay.
Right, and as it pertains to the spirit of the Open Meetings Act, I agree. As it pertains to the fact that at any given time, 4 people are together, then I'd have to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure that that's really a
I
solid
understand
argument.
it, but it
Yeah.
just,
Right.
I mean, it
But
just always seemed
I think we're
funny to me that,
I think your point is a valid one, though. By saying we name 3 committee members and we have an alternate, we've got somebody who's involved. I mean, I'd like to think that if Mr. Capral at any time said, how's that going? I wouldn't say, whoa, buddy, you don't get to look at this because you're not a part of the committee. I mean, I don't think anything about this process is hidden. So I think
and there's
we can-
times, I mean, I'll be honest, there's times when you have these committees where, you know, Dave, or I don't know, you, Adam, whatever, doesn't really matter. You send out a whole thing to the whole board that says, hey, here's, you know, what we've done so far.
right. But that's a one-way communication. It's not
here's
interaction,
a
I think, is
PDF,
what Mr. Kirk
you
is
know.
saying.
Open Meetings Act is trying to avoid deliberations or
Right.
decisions before it comes back to the board. If 4 of you are deliberating
understand.
and kind of talking about it, comes back here, then it's not really
Right.
coming back here, it's done already. That's what it
Right.
tries to avoid.
I don't know, it's just a study to me, so it's really not, I mean, it's not like you're making any, you know, I don't know, it's not like we're gonna say, all right, tear down half the community and we're gonna make it a, you know, coastal waterway.
Yeah, right.
I would ask Mr. Capra if he put that into a form of a motion, what he was,
Yeah, I'd make a motion to form a coastal zone management waterfront redevelopment committee consisting of Mr. Verkest, Mr. Brado, and Mr. Tominello, with Mr. Witt being an alternate member.
support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Capro with support by Mr. Swakowski. We've had a fair amount of discussion. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you, Board. As I say, I'm sure that however this shapes up, there's be plenty of opportunity for input from,
See, I didn't put my name in either, see, I just figured I'd wait and see how it shook out, and if nobody's, okay.
well, we've got 2 more things on our agenda. One would be public comments. These are of general nature, 5-minute limit. And then beyond that, we do have a closed session to discuss GELC contract negotiations.
Bill Servil, resident. You made a point for me just a few minutes ago. Mr. Capral, when you were talking about spending $9,500, stated that he had no idea how much money we're talking about. Well, I understand you have a negotiation committee of 3, and you just explained why, but there's no reason why the other trustees can't know what's going on in that negotiation. They'll have some kind of idea, at least what you're talking about for the building. I have no idea what it is, but I'm sure you do. Why don't you inform the rest of the board so that they know what you're talking about? Maybe they'll change their mind on voting for $9,500. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment, move back to board comment. I do believe this board has had at least one that I recall, a closed session to discuss some of the terms of this. I think, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Capral, but what I perceived was Mr. Capral's question wasn't about the cost of purchasing the building and negotiating with the school as much as it was any potential cost to renovate the building. And I answered your question based on that. If I misunderstood, I apologize.
No, that's correct.
Okay, so I do believe the board has been updated on our negotiations, but I don't believe we've have the numbers to even update the board on what potential costs might be involved, and I think that's where our next step is. Are there any other board comments? If not, we'd be looking to go into closed
I
session.
guess, I was talking to Mr. Witt earlier, I guess about the article in the Free Press about our water rates.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, some things come at you pretty quick. So, maybe an update if that's what you'd like, or,
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't read the article, but, I know it was in the Free Press, but.
Sure. Well, if you recall, I think it was at our last meeting, we approved what was titled Exhibit B, which is basically numbers that are used to calculate our rate. Our rate is based on several factors. For example, the distance that they push the water to us, and both in terms of linear distance across the land as well as elevation, goes into factoring how much that water is going to cost us. The city of Detroit, or the Detroit Water and Sewer Department, charges us a fixed cost per year, per month, to cover their fixed expenses. So if they have $100 of fixed expenses and we're 3% of the entire consumption for the whole system, we pay $3. That's our fixed cost. The second part of that is, and the second factor in that is how we use the water, when we use the water, and how much. Construction of the tank meant that we were able to store water at night and during a time when the city doesn't care how much water you use. The system, the Detroit Water and Sewer Department, their primary concern is that if on Thursday, July 30th at 5 p.m., everybody, for whatever reason, is coming home from work or watering the lawn or watering the garden or washing the dog, and the demand is the greatest at that point, that's their limit. And at that point, it's almost as if they're saying that's when water is the most expensive. But in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., we don't care, use all you want, because our pumps are massively oversized for that. So part of our rates are calculated or based on our peak hour, right? So they're saying, if you agree to this number, 4 units of water per hour, I mean, these might be millions of gallons, whatever that is. If you agree that 4 is what you need, then don't go over 4, and your rate's one thing. As soon as you go over, we're going to penalize. So we reviewed all the statistics and determined a peak of 4.2, which was greater than we've seen and what statistics show us that we'll ever hit. And by doing so, it lowered our rate. Now, they may have taken the raw cost of water and raised it 5%. But when you factor in all the other numbers serve to bring our rate down. So the 16% reduction, as much as I'd love to say it was through some strong-arm deal, it's basically the prudent decision that this board made several years ago to invest in the tank that allows us to store the water at night, use it during hot summer days through a series of controls to keep our consumption down and our peak numbers down, and that's what's resulted in that savings. And so that 16% reduction is the net of an increase across the board to everybody, as well as our decrease due to the investment in the tank. So that's the reason why. So, and through a standing motion that this board has, our water rates are based on what the actual rates are, plus our service amount. So,
Ready to serve.
yeah, so we have this cost, the ready to serve charge, the amount that we add per unit of water to basically pay for all the work that guys are doing right now, probably somewhere as we speak, repairing a broken water main, and the equipment that it takes to do that. So July 1 is when our water rates take effect, and so that's when we adjust our rate to the residents. But that rate is for 14 and 15. So the rate that we saw in the paper takes effect July 1 of 2014. So, are there any other comments? Otherwise, I'd be looking for a motion to enter into closed session.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Support.
All right, we've got a motion by Mr. Switkowski with support by Mr. Tominello to enter into closed session to discuss GELC negotiations. Discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Switkowski?
Yes.
Mr. Tominello?
Yes.
Mr. Brado is excused. Mr. Capral?
Yes.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Verkowski?
Yes. All right, thank you, board.